Hi everyone, welcome back. We are going to talk about interpreting functions again today, and we're going to go a little bit more involved. So in the previous lesson, we looked at a lot of graphs that were proportional. Today we're going to look at a lot that are non-proportional, which means we have to do some work with figuring out the slope and the y-intercept in a new way. Okay, so just as a quick review, remember another word for slope is, or word, phrase, whatever you want to call it, is rate of change. And the y-intercept can also be called the initial value. And when we're dealing with real-world problems, we tend to use rate of change and initial value instead of slope and y-intercept, just because when we're talking about the context of the problem, it just makes more sense to use those phrases. Okay, but just know that they do mean the same thing as slope and y-intercept. So let's jump right in. Example 1 says, a shoe store offers free points when you sign up for their rewards card. Then, for each pair of shoes purchased, you earn an additional number of points. The graph shows the total points earned for several pairs of shoes. Okay, so let's take a look at our graph here. We can see that the graph starts at 2 pairs of shoes purchased, and I'm getting 60 points when I purchase 2 pairs of shoes. And then for 4 pairs of shoes, I'm getting 90 points, and so on. Now, I can't tell if this graph is proportional, but if I had to guess, just based on the pattern that I'm seeing here, I don't think it would go through the origin. So one thing I'm going to have us do right away is let's talk about the slope of this line. If I were to count the rise over run from point to point, so from here to here, 60 to 90, that's a rise of 30. And then I'm going from 2 to 4, that's a run of 2. And if I go from that point to the next one, I can see again, I'm rising 30 and running 2. Rising 30 and running 2. And so I can kind of go in the opposite direction to just check and see if this actually is proportional or not. So if I'm rising 30 and running 2, if I go back 2 and down 30, I'm going to see that my initial value, my y-intercept, is right there at 30. Okay, so this graph is not proportional. Okay, so just kind of a good thing to point out before we even start. So part A says to write an equation to represent this function. Well, we did this in previous lessons where when we write an equation of a line, we use slope-intercept form, which looks like y equals mx plus b. Okay, so in order to write the equation of this line, I need 2 things. I need the slope and I need the y-intercept. Well, thankfully, we just talked about the slope. So remember, the slope is the rise over run. And so when I was going from point to point, I was noticing that each time I was rising 30 and I was running 2, which means that my slope is 15. Okay. The other thing we found as we were looking at the graph is we found the y-intercept. I continued my pattern of my slope, and I saw that my y-intercept was 30. Remember, the y-intercept is where does the graph cross the y-axis. Okay, so B, which stands for my y-intercept, is 30. So since I have the 2 pieces of information I need to write the equation, I can go ahead and say the equation is y equals 15x plus 30. Okay, so once you have those 2 pieces of information, you've got what you need to write the equation. Now part B says, find and interpret the rate of change. So again, remember, rate of change is the same as the slope, and we already found the slope. So I'm going to say it one more time, the slope we found was 15. Now what does that mean in the context of the problem? Well, one easy way to figure this out is to look at the labels on your axes. Remember, rate of change or slope is always y over x. And so if I look at my axes, that represents the points earned over the pairs of shoes purchased. Okay, so 15 means that I get 15 points for every pair of shoes purchased. Because remember, 15 is really over 1 when I'm writing the slope. And so using those labels on your graph, your axes, is pretty easy to then describe what the rate of change is. So I'm going to say 15 points are earned for each pair of shoes purchased. Okay, so when it says to interpret the rate of change, that's what they're asking you to do, is to explain what does that 15 mean in the context of the problem. All right, so similarly for C, it says find and interpret the initial value. Well, we've already found that the initial value, or the y-intercept, is 30. And so what does that mean? Well, if you think about it again as 30 points for no pairs of shoes purchased, why would they do that? Why would they give you 30 points without even buying any shoes? Well, if you go back up to the problem, it says a shoe store offers free points when you sign up for their rewards card. And so that 30 points are your free points for signing up. So we're going to say you get 30 points for free just for signing up for the rewards card. Okay, so that's what that 30 represents. All right, number 2. Music Incorporated charges a yearly subscription fee plus a monthly fee. The total cost for different months, including the yearly fee, is shown in the graph. Part A, write an equation to represent this function. Okay, so again, to write the equation, I need to be using my slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b, which means I need to know the slope and I need to know the y-intercept to figure this out. Okay, so looking at the graph, we can see it is not proportional, and so in order to find the slope, I'm going to be using either rise over run or the slope formula to figure this out. Okay, since my points are not at nice, I like to say corners, it's not easy to count the rise over run. So for this one, I'm going to use the slope formula. It's good to practice that anyways. And so let me write this out. I forgot. y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1 is our slope formula. And you can choose any 2 points that you want on that line. And so they give us quite a few options here. Just to make it simple, I'm going to use the first 2. So I'm going to use 1, 15 and 2, 18 as my 2 points. So I'm going to treat this as my first, and this is my second. Okay, so when I do my slope formula, I'm going to have 18 minus 15 as the subtracting of my y's, and 2 minus 1 is the difference of my x's. So that gives me a slope of 3. Okay, so I'm halfway there. I have my slope. Now I need to find my y-intercept. Now, it's never okay to guess. Okay, so I can see my y-intercept is right there, but I don't actually know the value of it. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to use your slope to figure out what would that be. So if each time I'm going up 3 over 1, I have to think backwards. If I go back 3 and down 1, where am I going to end up? Okay, so if you think about that, you're going to end up at 0, 12. Now, if that's confusing to you, I'm going to show you another method, which in the future you'll have to use, so it's good to know this way too. So, and this is going to be brand new, so make sure you're following along here. In order to find out a y-intercept when you don't see it on the graph, what we can do is we can use our slope-intercept formula to figure it out. And what we do is we pick 1 point. So I'm just going to pick the point 115. And I plug 1 in for x, since it's the x-coordinate, and 15 in for y, since it's the y-coordinate. And I also know the slope is 3, so I'm going to plug that in for m. So I'm going to have 15 for y, because that's the y-coordinate from the point I picked. I'm going to plug in 3 for m, because that's the slope that I got, times 1, because that's the x-coordinate of the point that I picked. And the b, the y-intercept, is what I don't know. That's what I'm trying to figure out. And so what we do is we solve for b. So 3 times 1 is 3 plus b. And to get b alone, I would subtract 3 from both sides, and I would get 12. So just like we figured out when we were just kind of counting backwards, I can also do that algebraically and get the same thing. Now that I have the 2 pieces I need to write the equation, I can do it. So y equals 3x plus 12 is my equation of the line. Okay, so you've done the hard part. Now part B says find and interpret the rate of change. All right, well, rate of change is slope. We've already found the slope. It's 3. And so when I'm interpreting it in the context of the problem, use your axes labels. Total cost is y, number of months is x. So this would mean that it's $3 per month. So I'm going to say it costs $3 per month for the subscription, because remember that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about a Music Inc. subscription. All right, part C, find and interpret the initial value. So again, we've already found the initial value, or the y-intercept. It was 12. What does that mean? It means that after 0 months, you're paying $12. So it's kind of like when you first start your subscription, you're paying it. If you go back up, it says right here, they charge you a yearly subscription fee plus the monthly fee. And so that $12 must be the yearly fee. So the yearly fee is $12. That's what that initial value represents. All right, let's go to number 3. Amy has some photos in her photo album. Each week, she plans to add 12 photos. Amy has 120 photos after 8 weeks. Assume the relationship is linear. Okay, so this is completely different from what we've been doing. I didn't even give you a graph in this situation. And so what we have to do is use the information that they gave us to figure out the equation, the slope, and the y-intercept. Now, what's important here is that they told you the relationship is linear, okay? If we didn't know that, technically we wouldn't be able to write the equation of the line because we don't know if it's increasing by a constant rate, okay? So the first thing I want us to look at is this fact that she plans to add 12 photos each week, okay? That information is your rate of change in disguise, okay? Another way to phrase this would be 12 photos per week. Okay, as soon as you see that per, you know that that's a rate. And so I'm just going to write over here that that is my slope. Any rate of change in a problem is your slope. Okay? Now, the other thing I need to write the equation is the y-intercept, which would mean how many pictures did she have in week 0? And I don't know that. All I know is that she has 120 pictures after 8 weeks. And so that information that they're giving you is actually a point on the line. Okay, so here's where it gets a little tricky. How do I know which is the x-coordinate and which is the y-coordinate of that point? Go back to your rate of change. If we're talking about 12 photos per week, remember, photos per week, y to x, means that 12 photos, so photos is y, per 1 week means that x is weeks. Okay, so this point is going to be 8 because weeks is x, comma 120 because photos is y. So that's tricky. Okay, but again, you always go back to your rate of change or your slope, and whatever that label is, it's going to be the y to the x. Okay, so we did this on the front when I showed you guys how to find the y-intercept given the slope and a point. And so what we do is we start with our slope-intercept formula, and we plug in all of the information we're given. Okay, so from the point, I know that y is 120. I know that my slope is 12. I know that my x-coordinate from that point is 8. And the b, the y-intercept, is what I don't know. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to solve for b. So 120 equals 12 times 8 is 96 plus b. And so to solve for b, I'm going to subtract 196 from both sides. I'm going to rewrite this over here because I'm out of room. So minus 96 on both sides gives me 24 for b. Okay, so now that I have m and b, my slope and y-intercept, I can put it together. And my equation is y equals 12x plus 24. All right, so find and interpret the rate of change. We've done this. The rate of change or the slope is 12. What does it mean? We already wrote right up here. It means that she's adding 12 photos per week to her photo album. So Amy adds 12 photos per week to her album. Okay, the initial value, we're going to find and interpret that. So our B we found was 24. What does it mean? It means how many pictures she started with. So we're going to say she started with 24 photos in the album. And the way that I knew that, again, was because it means the point 0, 24. So after 0 weeks, she has 24 pictures in there. So just by thinking about that means that's what she started with. All right, let's do another one that's similar to that. Make sure we're okay. So a zoo charges a rental fee plus $2 per hour for strollers. The total cost of 5 hours is $13. Again, we're going to assume that this relationship is linear. All right, so can you spot the rate of change or the slope in this problem? Here it is. $2 per hour. That's your rate, which means my slope is 2. Okay, when they say the total cost of 5 hours is $13, that's a point. So how do I know which is the x-coordinate and which is the y-coordinate? Well, if I go back to my slope, they're saying dollars per hour, which means dollars is y and hours is x. So this would be the point 5, since hours is x, 13, since the money is y. Okay, so right now when I'm going to write my equation, I don't have the y-intercept. So again, we're going to use our slope-intercept form, and we're going to plug in everything we know, and we're going to solve for b, our y-intercept. Okay, so from the point that I was given here, 13 is y. My slope is 2. My x-coordinate is 5, so 2 times 5, plus b. So if I simplify that, I get 13 equals 10 plus b. Bring this over here. So to solve for b, I have to subtract 10 from both sides, and I'm going to get that b is 3. And so now I have the two things I need to write my equation. Y equals 2x plus 3. I'm just plugging in the slope and the y-intercept. So there's the equation of that line. Find and interpret the rate of change. Okay, so the slope we already said was 2. What does it mean in the context of the problem? They tell us it costs $2 per hour to rent a stroller. Okay, find and interpret the initial value. The initial value, or the y-intercept, we found was 3. What does that mean? It means after 0 hours, you're being charged $3. Why is that? Well, if you go back and read it again, it says a zoo charges a rental fee plus $2 per hour. So that $3 that you're paying, even though you haven't used it at all, is your rental fee. So the rental fee is $3. All right, awesome job. We have one more. And in this one, we have a table for our information. So let's see. The table shows how much money Spencer has saved. Assume the relationship between the two quantities is linear. So again, they have to tell us that because otherwise we're not able to write the equation of a line. And so we have to get all of our information from the table now. Okay? So what I can do to find my slope, I can do this a couple of ways. Now, we've talked about how slope is the change in y over the change in x. Remember that triangle symbol means delta, which means change. What I can do is I can look at my table and see how does y change and how does x change. So let's see. I'm going from 110 to 130. That's adding 20. And then from 130 to 150, I'm adding 20. 150 to 170, I'm adding 20. So I can see that there's a pattern here. My change in y, or my rise, is 20. Let's look at our change in x. Each time, I'm adding 1, which means my change in x, or my run, is 1. So my slope, because it's rise over run, is 20 over 1, or just 20. So from a table, that's kind of a quick way to find your slope. Now, if you don't like that, you could pick 2 points from the table, and you could do your slope formula, and you'll still get 20. Okay, but I kind of like doing that when I can. So my slope here is 20. Now, I also need the y-intercept. So I'm going to show you a trick to get that also. If you were looking at a table and you wanted to see the y-intercept, your x-coordinate would have to be 0, right? Because 0 something is always your y-intercept. Well, because I don't know what that is, I could work backwards and figure it out. So I'm just going to write right above here. At 2 months, how much money would he have saved? Well, at 3 months, he had $110. And if it was going up by 20 each time, and I'm thinking backwards, I would subtract 20 and get, after 2 months, he had $90. And then I can do it again. How much would he have in his account after 1 month? So if I go back $20, he'd have $70. And I have to go one more time. At the start of his saving, he had $50 because I, again, subtract 20. Okay? So that's kind of a nice way to bypass the whole plugging it into y equals mx plus b and solving for b. Again, if you don't like that, you're welcome to do it the same way we did examples 3 and 4. Take a point, take the slope, plug it in, and solve for b. Okay, but now that I have both pieces of information, there is my equation. All right, so find and interpret the rate of change. We found the rate of change was 20. And so what does that mean? Remember, 20 something per something. So in this case, y is our money saved and x is our months. So this means that he is saving $20 per month. He saves $20 per month. So when you're explaining your rate of change, it should always be some kind of rate, something per something. Find and interpret the initial value. So we found the initial value to be 50. What does that mean? It means that in month 0, he had $50, which means he started with $50. So he started with $50. Sorry, I don't want that to look like 150. He started with $50 saved. Okay, great job, guys. So in our next lesson, we're going to talk about comparing functions. So we'll be doing very similar things, but we're going to be looking at 2 functions at a time. So stay tuned.